I've set out to answer the question, who's the greatest running back of all time? Typically, this comes down to a three-man conversation. But there are some who argue there's a fourth running back who ought to be included. I happen to agree. So I wondered who else has a claim to at least be mentioned in the GOAT conversation. To sort it out, I've put together a comparative analysis featured in this GOAT running back video series. Welcome to Volume 4, Impact. If you haven't seen Volumes 1 through 3 yet, please do. The links for all the videos are posted below. To move forward, I've put together a quick synopsis of what's in the overall analysis. I'm assessing these 40 running backs using these 5 categories with data and information from here and game film from there with careers that fall in line with this time boundary using about 115 different stats, a few custom analytics, and hundreds of hours of game film from across more than 6 decades. No highlights were used in the making of this analysis. And we're following these rules of engagement. It's all covered in the previous videos. With that out of the way, on to the analysis for impact. Like the last video, I put together a custom analytic. It's designed to show how each running back's contribution drove team results. Even if his team wasn't a champion or dominant in any way, we can still evaluate how much of the load the running back carried and how much he was encumbered by his team. Then, we compare those factors with the team's win-loss record. This illustrates the running back's impact. As usual, my goal is to quantify this somehow. The best place to start is with the criteria. Impact, as I just described it, is the effect the running back's performance had on the team's record in the regular season. I'm using the career peak in the same way as discussed in the performance video. Jim Brown's 9-season career is the benchmark for assessing all backs. Check out Volume 3 for the details. The impact rating itself is a custom analytic using various team stats, team rankings, and running back stats to calculate the detailed variables. These stats and rankings are the official listings from each team found on ProFootballReference.com, including wins, losses, points for and against, total yards, first downs, league ranks, strength of schedule, all pros and Pro Bowls on the roster, and more. The seasonal impact ratings from across the career peak are averaged together to provide the final impact rating. From there, we have the top 10 most impactful running backs. A couple of quick notes before I dive in. You can see there's no Emmitt Smith. Jim Brown and his successor, Leroy Kelly, are right next to each other, as are Sayers and Payton. More on these points later. Tiki Barber hasn't been in the top 10 for any other category, same with Sayers and Kelly for that matter, and Curtis Martin was top 10 in only one other video. It's interesting that we have a few fresh faces in the mix. Here's the next 15, and the rest. Something else to note, the backs from several of the most well-established dynasties or multi-season championship teams come out pretty low in the impact rankings. More to come on that. To understand how it all got that way, let's take a look at why impact matters and how the analytics work. First off, it factors in how competitive or not the overall team was as to proportionately credit the running back for the results. The team weight variable is derived from the team's strength on both sides of the ball, while also factoring in the rating of the opposition according to strength of schedule. This amounts to the team's competitiveness rating. A high rating on this variable means a lighter burden on the running back, thus a lighter team weight, further resulting in a low impact rating. Next, we assess how the running back's performance contributed to the team results. This variable is the running back's offensive load. It's based on the ratio of the back's total production score divided by the team's. The metric for total production score may be familiar. That is, if you took a good look at the offensive production score from the performance video. I'm sure you didn't, but if you did, you can recognize the metric's basic construction. And overall, discussing impact gets to the heart of why they play: winning. These 3 variables are multiplied together, then scaled up by a factor of 10 so we have a usable number based on decimal places. The comment section is open for business if anyone has any questions, comments, or concerns. But up front, and at the top of the list, we find Walter Payton. He, without a doubt, provided the biggest carry job of all the backs on this list, and realistically, of all time. This includes the mid-'80s where the Bears defense was so legendary. But on the offensive side of the ball, throughout his career, he played with subpar quarterback quality, rock-bottom skill position quality, and one of the worst offensive line quality ratings the league has ever seen. You can note that only 2 other running backs appear on all 3 of these lists in the worst 10 spots. There's OJ and Gale Sayers. As an example of both the lack of quarterback support and the impact Payton provided, we can look at the 5 seasons in which he threw a touchdown. He contributed greater than 10% of the team's total passing TDs in that time, totaling 8 regular season touchdown throws for his career, the most by a non-quarterback since the 1970 league merger. He played with a Pro Bowl quarterback only once, which was a gimme for Jim McMahon in 1985, because the team was so dominant. McMahon himself put up pretty low numbers, like 57% completion rate, 15 touchdown passes against 11 interceptions, and a passer rating of 82.6. Overall, the Bears' passing offense was rated 20th for yards and 22nd for touchdowns, at a time when the NFL only had 28 teams. On the other hand, for that season, Payton led the Bears' rushing attack to be the #1 rushing offense for attempts, yards, and touchdowns. He did this twice in back-to-back seasons. No other running back on this list has achieved 2 seasons like that, much less back-to-back. As a matter of fact, only Jim Brown, Larry Zonka, and Franco Harris achieved that feat even once. Payton also never played with a Pro Bowl receiver, or one that even produced a 1,000-yard season throughout their career. On the other hand, he was the team's leader in receptions 6 times, including the seasons in the run-up to the Super Bowl in 1983, 84, and 85. Moreover, he was the #2 target among Bear receivers an additional 5 times throughout his career. That's 11 seasons in the top 2 for receptions on his team. This is more than Hall of Fame wide receivers Randy Moss and Michael Irvin were for their teams, tied with Marvin Harrison as a top 2 target during his career. Of course, Payton didn't have the target volume or receiving production that those guys had, but the point is, as a running back, he carried the pass-catching load for his team with no one else garnering the big receiving numbers. At the time of his retirement, he held the record for the most career receptions by a running back, and to this day, he's still the Bears' all-time leader in receptions. Next, he didn't have a Pro Bowl lineman until his 11th year, the 1985 Super Bowl season. At that time, Jimbo Covert and Jay Hilgenberg were both Pro Bowlers, with Covert also being named first-team All-Pro. They were both awarded the same in 1986, with Hilgenberg making the Pro Bowl once more in 1987. But during Payton's first 10 years, none of his linemen had achieved any measurable level of recognition. He ran for hard yards in those years, especially considering that he carried the highest offensive load amongst all running backs discussed in these videos, with the worst offensive strength. All in all, the Bears' entire offensive strategy ran through Walter Payton, pun intended, and this strategy delivered. In 1977, his 3rd season, he carried the load all the way to the Bears' first postseason appearance since 1963, nearly a 15-year gap. In 1984, he led the team to their first division title and first postseason victory in over 20 years. Then, in 1985, his MVP caliber performance put them on path to the first conference championship win and the only Super Bowl ring in the history of the franchise. Of course, the Bears' 46 defense was a significant part of their historic success in 84 and 85. But the defense didn't rush for over 1,600 yards and 1,500 yards respectively, nor gain more than 2,000 yards from scrimmage in both seasons, not to mention put up double-digit touchdowns. Of course, every running back listed played a key role in their team's success, but Walter Payton carried his team the most and was critical to them making it to the Super Bowl mountaintop. Next takeaways regarding Jim Brown's standing in this category. His 8th place result sticks out immediately, where we might have expected to see him higher. After all, he had the 3rd highest offensive load, but he played with a very strong team, both offensively and defensively. High team strength values are listed low in these tables because they lead to lower team weight and thus lower impact ratings. This takes me back to an earlier observation. Brown and Kelly are right next to each other on the impact rankings. This is instructive in how the analytics work. As we just saw, the Cleveland Browns had a fairly strong team during Jim Brown's time, and they were a bit weaker across Leroy Kelly's tenure as the starting running back. After factoring in the rating of the opposition, we get a team weight result for each back, showing that Jim Brown's version of the team during his peak was stronger and therefore a lighter weight for him to bear. So running the metric for these two, we see the team weight variable goes to Leroy Kelly. This is multiplied by the offensive load, which goes to Jim Brown. There's lots of math with me. Sorry about that, but I find it necessary. Next is to multiply by the win-loss percentage. This also goes to Brown, but by a small margin. Overall, this gets us the final product, also known as the impact rating. Brown comes out ahead based on the average of these ratings from across the career peak. The results are fairly close, leading to them coming out next to each other in the rankings. The next takeaway has to do with Barry Sanders. He appears higher than Brown largely because he played with a weaker team, driving up his team weight variable. This indicates that Sanders had a heavier burden to carry, a much heavier burden. That's right, that's Jim Brown all the way at the bottom in 40th place with the lowest team weight, and therefore the most competitive or strongest team relative to its era. The 60s Browns weren't quite a dynasty, but they were a very strong team. Additionally, Sanders is near the top of the list for offensive load. So as it goes, the variables for team weight and offensive load elevate his rating, but it's also tempered a bit because his career peak win-loss percentage was below 500. This tells us that while his contribution to his team was significant, he didn't quite have the level of success that some of the other running backs did. This relationship between the results for Sanders and Brown scales to Gale Sayers as well. He actually had a lower win-loss percentage than Sanders, yet he placed higher in this category in a similar fashion to Sanders placing higher than Brown. This is due to the 60s Bears being even worse than the Lions of the 90s. Sayers had only one season of Mike Ditka as a fellow Pro Bowler during his 5-season career peak. The lack of accomplished teammates on the offensive line, in the other skill positions, and at quarterback left Sayers with the absolute worst/heaviest team weight of all the running backs in this analysis. As a matter of contrast, we can see that the Lions had a few other offensive weapons for a portion of Barry's career. In particular, there was 4-time Pro Bowler and 3-time first-team All-Pro wide receiver Herman Moore. He also won the league reception title twice. Then there was Brett Perryman and Johnny Morton, who were a pair of multi-season 1,000-yard receivers. You can see how their production influenced the skill position quality variable, except here. That's Barry's 2,000-yard rushing season. That performance overshadows the contributions from the other players, driving down the value of the variable for skill position quality, giving more credit to Sanders towards the impact rating. On top of that, Detroit had 1 or 2 solid offensive linemen throughout Barry's career. This includes first-team All-Pro tackle Lomas Brown and multi-season Pro Bowlers in both Brown and Kevin Glover. Now, this is far from a legacy team. As a matter of fact, the offensive strength that Sanders played with was the 10th worst of the 40 backs being analyzed, and he had the 6th worst team weight. Nonetheless, the presence of these few quality teammates lightened the team weight variable just enough to affect Barry's rankings compared to someone like Sayers. Next, I want to highlight a clear trend in the data showing that running backs on strong championship-level teams end up with lower impact ratings. This is due to the lower team weight variable in the metrics. Ultimately, that's the point of this analytic, to make sure that running backs are given proportional credit for their team's winning results. Good players in the other skill positions, a strong offensive line, and or a talented QB eases the pressure on the running back, thereby having a reducing effect on the impact rating. As we might expect, running backs from dynasties or other legacy teams are affected by this the most. Here we see Terrell Davis, Thurman Thomas, Tony Dorsett, Franco Harris, Jim Taylor, Larry Zonka, and Roger Craig. They were all great backs that played on great teams where their level of help is reflected in the impact ratings. This leaves all these players in the bottom 15 for this category. The opposite condition is also true. Playing with a relatively weak team held down the performance numbers of several backs, but where those results helped their teams muster winning records, they rose up quite a bit in the impact rankings. The largest upward shift in rankings between the performance category and impact goes to Earl Campbell by 18 spots and Otis Anderson by 17. For Campbell, this shift landed him in the top 10, while Anderson ended up in mid-tier at 20th. That's mainly because he played with one of the least competitive teams of all time. Now, the improvements between performance and impact ratings that I want to touch on the most are Marcus Allen and Curtis Martin. Each back had a 10-rank boost, putting him in the top 10 for impact. In the longevity video, I gave mention to the conflict between Marcus Allen and Raiders owner Al Davis. Davis famously referred to Allen as a cancer, which seems pretty extreme and unfounded to me, but that opinion had a resounding effect on Allen's results since he was essentially benched for 3 seasons. While he was sidelined, Bo Jackson, Roger Craig, and Eric Dickerson were brought in over those years, seriously reducing Allen's production. Inexplicably, the former MVP and Super Bowl MVP was getting single-digit carries per game. He was down to 0 starts at one point and was reduced to sub-300 yards per season. This diminished offensive load translated to reduced team success as well. Throughout his career peak, wherever his usage and offensive load went, so too did the team's win-loss percentage. Here we can see clearly that the team's success tracks closely with Allen's offensive load, and those results track closely with his impact rating. Unfortunately, the owner-player controversy between him and Al Davis sidetracked his career significantly, leaving us to wonder, as well as Allen himself, if he had been able to perform to his fullest, what could have been. Looking at his last few seasons after the trade to Kansas City, at ages 33 to 37, and uptick in offensive load shows how he still drove the team's win-loss percentage. Had he been uninhibited during his prime, we could have seen a whole different GOAT conversation. A few spots down in the impact rankings is Curtis Martin. He's often overlooked in these type of best ever and all-time great conversations, but to his credit, during his 11 years in the NFL, he put up 10 consecutive 1,000-yard rushing seasons. He started strong, earning Rookie of the Year and a Pro Bowl selection, then finished strong in year 10 with a rushing title, gaining nearly 1,700 yards and being named first-team All-Pro. His remarkable run of 1,000-yard seasons is tied for the second most with Walter Payton and Barry Sanders, right behind Emmitt Smith. Even though he didn't really have a signature dominant season until the end of his career, his consistent results year after year had a meaningful, long-term impact on his team's success. This was most relevant in the back half of his career after leaving the Patriots and going to the Jets. There, the team weight got heavier, so his level of impact was critical towards helping them sustain a winning record. So there it is, the impact analysis. In a way, I find this category to be one of the most relevant topics for the overall GOAT discussion. However, it's absolutely the most difficult to quantify. That's why I put so much effort into developing the elaborate analytics. It's far from perfect, but it leverages data and statistics that are available for all the running backs going back to the 50s. Bottom line, I personally haven't seen anything better. I will continue to tweak and modify the variables and equations for this as to improve the precision, but in the meantime, let me know if you have any thoughts on what you've seen so far, or if you have any questions on the numbers, rankings, takeaways, or anything really. But as is, Walter Payton had the biggest impact on his team's success compared to all other running backs. Says me. We're almost through the series. The final video, Volume 5, Eye Test, is ready to bring us home on the analysis. In that video, I'll also summarize the conclusion, doing an overall roundup on the results from all 5 categories. Thanks for checking out these videos, and I'd love to see you on the next one. I'd love it even more if you'd like and subscribe, leave a comment, and share this with another fan of running backs. Thanks again. Peace.